I'm happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This monumentous decree comes as a great beacon light of hope for millions of Negro slaves who have been seared in the flames of unwitting injustice. It comes at a joyous daybreak to the end of a long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is sadly crippled by the minuscules of segregation and the chains of democracy. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later, the Negro is still languishing in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile on his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize the shameful conditions. In a sense, we've come here to our nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall here. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it is obvious today that America has defaulted on her promissory note. Insofar as our citizens of color are concerned, insisting of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. We refuse to believe that there's insufficient funds in the great vault of opportunity of this nation. And so, we've come to cash this check. A check that will give us, upon demand, the riches of freedom and the security of justice. We've also come to this hollow spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. This is no time to engage in luxury of cooling off or taking tranquilizing drugs. The time is now to make real the promise of democracy. The time is now to rise from the dark and decelerate values of segregation, of sunlight path, and racial justice. Now is the time to lift our nation from quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. Now is the time to mark justice as a reality for all God's children. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of this moment. This is sweltering summer of Negro legitimacy